Oh my gosh, we're back. Can you
I
believe
know,
it?
I know we're on series 4 somehow, and we've got a great series lined up, not least with this first episode.
Yeah, I mean, can I say it? Roll the intro.
Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
That's right, we are back, and this episode's going to be a little bit different, but actually, it's a really exciting one.
Yeah.
So if you're new around here, I'm Hannah FH. I'm a social media and creative content specialist, and my co-host here is Joe Gallant, who's a web and brand designer. We both love to work with churches, and with Gourds and Pomegranates, we aim to give sort of really practical advice that you can put into practice with your church comms, whether that's social media, publicity, design, websites, video, PowerPoint, whatever, really.
Yeah, we cover a whole lot. But as we plunge into this 4th series of the podcast, we wanted to switch things up a little bit. So this episode won't be quite as practical on the ground advice or step by step, but instead we're taking a step back and we're asking some big questions about communications. And so that you don't just have to listen to us two, we've got some very, very special guests who have joined us recently.
Yeah, so that's enough rambling from us. Let's get into it. Of course, before the questions, we need an introduction to our guests. So let's get them to do just that.
So my name is Krish Kandaya, and I'm the director of the Sanctuary Foundation, and we work primarily to support refugees that have come to the UK, and we work with churches, we work with the government, we work with businesses and academics. We're a bit of a playmaker or a catalyst, trying to make things happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened.
So my name's Carl Knightley, and I do a variety of things. My main hat is working for London City Mission as part of their leadership team, and they're an organisation in London that seeks to share the good news of Jesus with those people who are least likely to hear it. And then, like many other people, I do other things as well, a few charity trustee bits and coaching and other things like that.
Hi, so my name is Jo Frost. I am Director of Communications and Engagement at the Evangelical Alliance, which basically means that I get to hear all the stories of what the church is up to and how people are coming to find out about Jesus, and then tell those stories to everyone and anyone who will listen about it. So I love it. I'm also co-leader of the Being Human project, which helps people explore what it means to be human in our cultural conversations, and helping people explore the God story and how that helps us understand who we are and the world in which we're living. So written a book, podcast, small group stuff, and loads of different things, all exploring this idea of how to share our story and live in it more fully.
I am Glenn Scrivener, and I work with Speak Life. We're an evangelistic ministry that's based on the South Coast, but we broadcast all around the World Wide Web as we try to lift up the name of Jesus.
There we go. With Krish, Carl, Joe, and Glenn, we have 4 amazing guests with such different roles and backgrounds. So I'm really looking forward to this, as we move into the questions. And, this first question is really critical, thinking about how we relate to one another. So let's first hear from Krish and Carl. So we've seen a significant cultural shift in recent years, not least with the impact of the pandemic and the rise of things like AI. Has anything stood out to you about the changing ways that people are communicating and relating to each other?
Yes, I think there's a couple of different ways in which people are changing the way they communicate and relate to one another. At one level, the lockdown and COVID gave people a real openness to use digital comms in a different way. Mm-hmm. So, for example, during lockdown, I helped organise a global summit on child welfare reform. And it would have been almost impossible to get all the government leaders and care experienced young people in the same space. But because of the necessity of using digital tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, people were more open to doing that. And that's led to a lot more kind of cross-cultural, international collaboration. Similarly, we use a new vehicle called the Great Big Live Assembly to help schools engage with big, scary topics like Black History Month or National Refugee Day, and we don't think that would have been possible before lockdown. So we went to 900 schools simultaneously
Wow.
with a live event, which was about 300,000 children. And schools have geared up and they're able to use digital technologies and conferencing in a way they weren't before. So there's lots of opportunities. I think with the rise of AI, we're going to see increased amounts of skepticism about what you see. So now you can create an AI avatar that looks and sounds just like you, but is it really you? Is that video that I saw on YouTube really the person I think it was? And part of me wonders whether we'll see a greater return to face. So those are kind of contrasting pulls, aren't they, between more openness to using digital tools, but as AI becomes more normal, will we have more paranoia, skepticism towards what we're seeing on a screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that through COVID, actually, we all had to catch up really quickly when it came to online communications. I remember helping my mum work out how to use Zoom so she could do a church service or a home group or what have you. And I think I was really struck about how quickly people adapted, particularly groups of people, demographics where we might have thought, no, they can't do that. So I think we showed our tenacity. I was part of founding a telephone line called the Daily Hope telephone line with the Archbishop of Canterbury and Faith and Later Life, and that was so older people could listen to church services online. And so I think what I found was that whatever your age or stage, people really gripped and grasped technology. I found it very bizarre having kind of an evening drinks catch up with friends via Zoom. But I think what it showed is people crave community and really wanted to remain connected with people, really.
So I think it goes without saying that we obviously had a really good time interviewing all these people. And if I don't mind saying so myself, I think we came up with some questions which, gave really good and interesting responses and really varied responses as well. Looking backwards, I guess, first with this one, because we're thinking about COVID and we're still, I think, feeling the after effects of that, even though we're several years after now, really. But looking back at the beginning of COVID and just how people caught up really quickly and areas that they wouldn't have touched beforehand, but now were just able to, adapt because they had to.
Yeah. And as well of the fact that, as Chris said, of being able to have this global reach with people that we wouldn't have been able to do possibly beforehand. And yeah, the pandemic was horrible and, awful, but actually it's led to a lot of positive things as well, because we were suddenly forced to be in these, difficult things. We're going, well, how do we do this conference? Well, okay, let's try it online. And actually that's, it resulted in some fantastic things, but kind of as Carl said, we still crave connection and community and being together, and that's not going to go away.
Yeah. Let's hear from Joe, who's got a bit of a different approach to this.
I think what I'm seeing is that despite the amount of platforms and opportunities people have to connect, especially online, we are seeing more and more fragmentation. So research in 22 talked about the fact that there are 3.3 million Britons who would classify themselves as chronically lonely. And that is massive. In the last few months, we've heard about Matthew Perry's passing. We have seen spikes in conversations around mental ill health, suicide, loss, mental health challenges causing people to be off work. We are seeing a breakdown in our connectivity rather than a flourishing. And I think that asks fundamental questions, both of how we are relating to each other and what the cost is of some of this hyperconnectivity, but also the possibility of the church to be a community, both in present, in the physical space, but also online, to offer people a place where they can bring their loneliness, they can bring their whole selves into that space and be welcomed in and be accepted into a place where you can actually relate and communicate with each other in a place where that's becoming increasingly challenging.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, like we said, we desperately crave connection as humans, but even though the online world may give us the opportunity to, I'll say allegedly connect, but we could connect, but actually we're not getting it in the way that we really need it and want it.
Yeah, that hyperconnectivity is a really good phrase. That
yeah.
we're always connected, and yet we're not really, And then as well, Jay said about the opportunities that the church can fill that gap. Let's take the positive out of it and say the church can provide the community that people are seeking, but we got to be intentional about doing it.
Yeah, and actually, not just churches; it's individuals as well, as Glenn touched on in his response.
I was saying to someone just this morning, as I reflected upon my neighbor who came to Christ, he, in the last 12 months, has become a Christian. And fascinatingly, even though our interactions have been almost on a daily basis, because he's a smoker in a non-smoking rented accommodation, and so he has to come out onto the porch to smoke like 20 times a day. So me and my wife have amazing conversations with he and his wife on a daily basis. And yet I was reflecting on all the significant gospel encounters I've had with him, and many have been face-to-face, but many have also been me WhatsApping him a podcast, me sharing with him via text message, a TikTok video or a YouTube video, or so much of my evangelism of him has been online, even though we are in person. And I just think narrowcasting is just massive nowadays. I mean, how many people have you flicked a link to on WhatsApp, even today? How many people have shared with you an article via text message? And this is the way so much of our interactions are. I was interested that the Diary of a CEO, at the very, very popular podcast and YouTube channel and all the rest, they collected together the most successful episodes from 2023.
Yeah.
And at the end of that year, what they showed to people as the most successful things are the things that were most shared on WhatsApp, which is just a really interesting metric to press into. Like, this is the thing that one person has really benefited from and will message just to a single individual or to the five-a-side football WhatsApp group or whatever it is. But that's the way people are sharing. And I think it's so valuable for Christians because we very much, want to share our faith not as paid advertisers, but as satisfied customers. And that's what narrowcasting excels at. I just heard this podcast. You got to hear this. I just fell down this YouTube hole. Check this out. That I think is something we're really trying to take advantage of at Speak Life.
So I think Glenn's very clearly talking about this podcast there. He's talking about sharing gourds and pomegranates. But it's picking up on what people are already doing, isn't it? I know that I do this all the time, that yes, occasionally I will share a link to something and broadcast it on Twitter or on Facebook or wherever. But actually most of what I share content-wise is sharing individual posts or individual links with individual people, narrowcasting as Glenn's called it. And I think that these individual interactions and that idea, that's something that we're going to come back to again and again throughout this episode.
Yeah, I have to say I love that term narrowcasting because I've used broadcasting in my work of talking about that's no longer what we're doing within social media, because it's we're not sort of just putting it out there and throwing the seeds out to as far as I can throw, and cool, I'll just like let them deal with that. But this, I've never heard it in the reverse of narrowcasting, of intentionally and specifically sending something to someone. And I just think it's a fantastic term. And yeah, Glenn talks about it sort of further on. I just think it's brilliant.
So our next question looks at this idea of using communication to reach people around us, and particularly, is that something that the church is actually actively involved with? So
let's first listen to Joe and Krish's response.
Are we doing enough to use online communication to reach those around us? And particularly with churches, do you think that churches have grasped the importance of this?
Well, I think we noticed when the pandemic happened that actually change can be accelerated. So you may have experienced in your local church that there wasn't that much online activity or online presence. And then all of a sudden we get ourselves kitted out and I don't know if you remember, we broke Zoom really early in the pandemic. Zoom crashed on a Sunday morning.
Easter, I think.
Yeah. No, I think it was a little bit later. I think it was just a random Sunday.
Oh.
And that was the amazing thing. Like I don't think it was Easter. I think it was just normal church and Zoom couldn't handle it. I mean, it can handle when every other business goes online, but when the church goes online, it's huge. So we know how to use it. And when we need to, we step up. But I think it can also be hugely overwhelming. I mean, AI kicked in and everyone's talking about AI. And I'm like, I don't know if I've got the bandwidth to know how to deal with this. I don't get it. I don't know what a prompt is. I don't know which website I should be using. I don't know if I should be paying for something or if it should be free. And a lot of the time we end up resorting back to what we're familiar with and what we know and we understand. Plus, I think for the church, there is something really important to recognize that actually to be together physically is the ideal, is the better. We are human, we are physical, incarnate beings. And so there is a cost to being online. But with all of that said, we are seeing so many stories of people encountering the church and encountering God in online spaces. I cannot tell you how many stories I've heard of people coming to faith through TikTok. My colleague was telling me this week about somebody getting baptized in her church because she'd watched The Chosen and had an encounter with God whilst watching The Chosen and gave her life to Jesus. Like, the online space is incredibly powerful. God is a communicative God, and he's going to use all the tools out there. Sometimes we just have to either bite the bullet or pick one. Yeah. Go for it, embrace it, try it out. Everyone's learning. But actually some of that resistance or that hesitancy is fair enough. But actually we can be brave because God is using it and we're seeing amazing stories come out of those spaces.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
At one level, there was a kind of quantum shift or a kind of tectonic plate movement when it came to churches using digital technology because of lockdown. I've got a little story. So I wanted to live stream a series of evening talks that I was doing in a little Baptist church in, no one needs to know where it is. And we did a survey of the local community to find out what the top questions that community had about God. And I wanted to live stream the responses so that, anyone in this town could engage with it, because not everybody was able to turn up. And I had a fight with the kind of, how do I want to describe them? Like the pastoral committee, because they thought it would break our child protection rules to have anything broadcast from the sanctuary of the church, even though I was the only one that was going to be on the screen, because, I was the one speaking. And I had to apologise that we'd do it because, no photography is allowed at all in the sanctuary building, even if I'm the only person. I give permission for my image to be seen. Anyway, the next week was lockdown, and suddenly no one could meet at all in the church. And so I offered to live stream the services, and they said, "Oh, that would be fantastic." Hang on, last week it was impossible. Now it was possible. And so there was a little church that had a complete mindset shift. And actually we live streamed our services to Facebook, and the average weekly attendance in this church went from, under 20 to over 500 because people were tuning in, however short amount of time they were tuning in for. So during lockdown, the necessity of change made churches willing to embrace the digital. Has that continued? Some churches have said, no, we want everyone back in the building, so we're not going to do a live stream, so we won't allow people that option because that option will somehow degrade our face-to-face service. While other churches said, you know what, there's a lot of people that use this online service as a shop window to check out what kind of church we are, and actually it's led to lots of people engaging with faith that haven't before. So I think there has been a major shift, a tectonic plate shift for many churches, but I think there's still way more ways that we could go forward. And I think some churches as soon as lockdown finished, it was like the spring that was stretched suddenly went back to, we can go back to normal again, rather than thinking, can we move forward to be creative and innovative in the way that we reach this generation?
That was quite a helpful reminder in a way from Joe about that when we broke Zoom. Like I'd say I've forgotten. I think more likely I blocked it out of my memory. And the same went for other tools as well at the time. But yeah, that idea that the church can do it, and we've proved that the church can embrace digital, the church can go for it and get its act together. But also that digital can be massively overwhelming for churches, and just the importance of sometimes, rather than trying to do everything, picking something, focusing on it and just going for it.
Yeah. And I just find it funny, like of Chris's story, that, you know, before the pandemic, it's like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. We can't use digital. And, you know, his is not an isolated story. We've heard it. I experienced it. And I'm sure countless people who were sort of kind of quite excited to experiment with digital.
Because they've been banging that drum for a while.
Well, yeah, pre-2020, we're like, oh, this is so hard. And then, you know, within a week, they're like, do you want us to try it? Oh, yeah, that sounds great. And it's just...
Suddenly, the time and the enthusiasm and even the budget was found.
But yeah, oh, yeah, no, it sounds a brilliant idea. And, I mean, it's frustrating, but also you sort of just have to go, right, I'm not going to get kind of resentful about it. Let's just run with it. And... yeah, sort of this necessity for change, you know, this necessity that suddenly we were in an environment, in a situation where our environment had changed, meant that we had to use digital to change how we were talking, engaging with each other. Yeah.
And I think, and this is something, as you'll hear, that Carl alluded to when we chatted to him, that we kind of have to hold on to the good, and rather than that spring just stretching back to normal, as Chris just said, we have to say, like, what are the good things that we can keep. So yeah, let's hear from Carl and Glenn.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? I think the church I go to is still streaming church services online, and I think that's a good thing. If my kids run well or whatever it might be, but I also think that that can be a barrier. Having online options for everything can perhaps make us lazy as church, because we need to go out to see people. You know, we're built for relationships. Ironically, whilst we're on a podcast, we're built for relationships when we're in person with each other. And so I think that these things have a place and have an important place, but they're only one part of the jigsaw. So I think churches and Christian groups really need to be on the front foot. And so online needs to be something within their suite of resources, but nothing can really replace face-to-face, in-person contact.
I think we are doing so much to connect with people online. It's just invisible to us what it is that we're doing. And I think, as I mentioned the narrowcasting thing to people, and the fact that so much of what is shared nowadays is not broadcast, but narrowcast using messaging apps, people are like, oh yeah, I hadn't realized I had been doing that. And there's a whole bunch of people who think to themselves that they are not online evangelists, or they're not digital communicators with other people because they don't have an Instagram account. And that's just not the case. I think people already are living a lot of their lives online and interacting with people online. I just think we need to be more intentional about it. And we need to name what is going on and then, harness it for good. So, my advice for people is not to try and fake it till you make it on TikTok or whatever. Not to be the online person you think an online person is, but you're already probably living some kind of digital life, even if it's just text messaging. My mother turns 80 this year, and she is a WhatsApp queen. She is already a digital communicator. And my goodness, my mother is brilliant at just sharing out the Facebook, videos and the tweets and all that kind of stuff via her WhatsApp. So, be more like my mum. Own what it is that you're doing. Be explicit that you're a Christian, and then don't be a jerk, which is something else that my mother does very well. She's very, very good at not being a jerk. And I think as Christians, we are way ahead of the pack if we can manage to live authentically online and not be a jerk. What can churches do? Well, goodness, there are some amazing tools for reaching your neighborhood. I still believe in knocking the neighborhood, and we knock our parish, the doors around our parish 3 times a year, and we totally believe in doing that. But if you believe in that, why would you not believe in doing a targeted Facebook advertising campaign with whatever it is that you're pushing through letterboxes? Because Facebook is very good at geographically locating your target audience and getting them where they are. So can churches be doing more? They absolutely can be doing more. But I think a lot of it is just about noticing that you are already interacting with people online, and that online communication is not taking you away from embodied face-to-face relationships. It is augmenting what is already happening with those face-to-face relationships. And so why wouldn't you leverage what you're already doing?
Brilliant. Really good.
I love that.
So I really like that both of them touched on that face-to-face and in-person stuff, physical stuff is still really important. But actually, like making that link that if you're doing it face-to-face, then why would you not do it online? You know, if you're knocking on people's doors, why would you not have paid ads for the same sort of thing? I think that's a really helpful thing to not separate it out. Like it's helpful strategically to separate things so we can say, right, what can we invest here? What can we invest there? But actually, it's the same goal. It's the same thing that we're doing for both.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, just that thing of, if we are going to keep live streaming, as Carl mentioned, and that can be a really helpful thing. You know, we've covered before, why would you still be doing it? And if you are going to still be doing it, how do you do it well? Rather than it just being, oh, we do it because we did it in COVID, or we do it because we've got a webcam now. But how do we do it well? So we'll link to that episode in the show description.
Yeah, but I think from both perspectives of, if you're doing online like live streaming and stuff, as a person who's pro digital, of not having that attitude, and which I think most of us wouldn't, that, oh, this is the replacement. But also, if you're not so digital, is that actually acknowledging and trying to understand it's not trying to replace it, it's an addition to, as you say, you know, if you know it works door to door knocking, why is this not something that should be factored in as well?
Yeah, and then again, we're back on narrowcasting, but I think it's a really key point, and applying it to the church as well as individuals. So what can we do as a church, I guess, to encourage individuals? Because it's recognizing they're already doing it, and then just encouraging people to actively be looking for things they can share, actively looking for who they can share it with, and just being intentional with it, because it's something which is so accessible for people to do. Like, it's not daunting to share something with your friend. It might be daunting to share a Bible verse on your Facebook profile.
Yeah, but it's about sort of that intentionality of it, of being like, actually, I am online, I am here, I'm gonna, you know, how Glenn said it, of leverage what you're doing already. I'm just gonna share it with my friends because actually that is something that I can do. And Glenn also said the first of what I want to turn into a number of sort of key phrases and hashtags that we've learned from these first interviews was hashtag be like Glenn's mum. And I think that's that was just a lovely story anyway. But I think what was so encouraging of the fact that there's often this attitude that, oh, digital is only for the young people because it's what the young people like doing. Yeah, we're a bit more attuned to the ability to converse online, but also older generations are not idiots. They can adapt to it. And the amount of people in my previous church during the pandemic that very quickly were happy to go on Zoom and were, you know, they're older than my parents and they were doing better than my parents at just getting on Zoom and talking and using the chat and stuff. Like Glenn said, that his mum is a WhatsApp queen, and the fact that she is using the technology that she is comfortable with, but actually that she is willing to try that technology in a form that probably wasn't so natural to her to begin with.
Yeah. So let's keep thinking about that theme as we go on to the next question, and we hear from Chris as we think about that crossover between the online presence of churches and individuals and discipleship of individual Christians.
What role do you think the online presence of churches and individual Christian leaders should play in the spiritual growth of individual believers?
Well, I believe we were called to have our whole lives transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit, walking in the footsteps of Jesus and submitting to the Lordship of God. And that means every aspect of our life matters. And that includes our digital footprint. So I think digital discipleship is as necessary as our financial discipleship or our professional discipleship in terms of what our career kind of looks like. So we need to see the whole of life as kind of one. The London Institute for Contemporary Christianity has talked a lot about whole life discipleship, and that means our online life as much as our offline life, as it were. So I do think that's important. I've seen it happen in some interesting parts of the world. I was at a global event in Mexico, and it was a student worker from Uganda that was doing a Bible study with 200 students at the same time, because he would just set a little Bible verse that they were going to think about on a big WhatsApp group. And for the rest of that day, everyone had to give a little response to what that Bible verse might mean to them throughout the day. And, as the day went on, those pings were coming in where someone would say, oh, this really speaks into what I'm facing right now, or could you pray for me? And suddenly, digital technology and discipleship were being intimately woven together. A whole group of people, community was being formed. So I think that's quite exciting, and I think there's lots that we can learn from around the world about how to do that well.
Oh, I just love what he says about just our whole lives being transformed by God, and that it is digital is a necessary part, as is with other things within our lives.
And that phrase of digital discipleship, I think, is helpful. Not to separate it out, because it's as necessary as everything else. It's all part, but just it's something that we can forget about, and so having a phrase like that can just remind us that it is a thing that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so encouraging as well to hear these stories of different ways that things are done, of it's not just the kind of Sunday service plonked into an online thing and it doesn't quite work, but there's sort of Bible study WhatsApp group of actually that working in a space, not done for an hour and a half and that's it, but it being for the whole day. People can add contributions and just to be able to connect them with so many people from around the world, but also probably bigger numbers than we'd be able to do if we were gathering on site somewhere. So Bible studies don't need to look the same as what we kind of maybe previously have done, as it's changed probably how it was kind of 200, 300 years beforehand. So yeah. Anyway, let's now go on to Carl and hear what he has to say.
I'm someone who really enjoys social media. Enjoy is it's an interesting word, isn't it, actually? I'm very active in social media. And so I really appreciate Christian leaders who are doing that. I think there are some who perhaps like me, who will, retweet a lot of stuff that they're involved with, offer a vague offering on something or another. And there are others like Krish Kandiah who will often speak into lots of things and offer that thought leadership. And then there'll be church leaders who are getting into rows with each other about what's right and what isn't right. And so we will find ourselves somewhere in that spectrum. And incidentally, there'll be lots of church leaders who are leading winsomely and helpfully online too. So that's not a slight against all church leaders. But I think it is important to have people doing that. But I also think that when you do stick your head up above the parapet like that, you've got to be really wise. You've got to know that you're going to probably take a pounding from somebody. But also, I think you've really got to think about what you say. Because there are only a certain number of characters and things can often be misinterpreted. So I'll make it clear what I believe in, perhaps on my bio, on Twitter, on X, but also I will make sure I don't get sucked into a rabbit hole of having a debate online. So I think we should be there, but I think we need to be really careful about how we conduct ourselves in those environments.
So Carl's taken a bit of a different angle, and I'm really glad he did. I think it was really helpful to be thinking about church leaders, because it's not just people within the church. It's not just the church themselves that have an online presence, but actually church leaders do have an opportunity, at least, for using that platform. But they then have that increased responsibility in the same way that they are under pressure when they're up the front, because they are not only representing the church, but they are preaching from God's word. They're going to be judged differently online as well. And so it's that responsibility. And I think I need to consider it and take it seriously, that it shouldn't be like a separate thing. It should be part of your person, but you need to just carefully think about what you're putting out there with that added weight of being the church leader.
Yeah. And like you said, of things being misinterpreted online, you might, if you said it, it wouldn't sound that bad, or you could say it with a smile and it sounds jokey, but actually if you have written something because perhaps you just think it's funny to reply in that way, or actually it is something that you do really disagree with, but actually it just can be difficult if you have that presence, maybe because you're a leader and or of a church or an organization, but actually you do have a large audience, and actually thinking about how that reflects back on you, as it reflects back on your organization, and actually kind of God to an extent of like the whole Anglican Twitter and stuff, of that people kind of go, oh, if that's what Christians are like, I don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, so the importance of wisdom, especially for church leaders, there obviously that goes for everyone. So let's hear from Joe and Glenn and see what their perspectives are on this.
I think what we do know is that people stalk online. And they're going to test things out in the virtual before they cross any kind of threshold in the physical. So again, time and again, we are hearing of people say, I was watching your church online for 6 months before I walked through the door. Yeah. Or I reviewed your social media presence for a year before I met you in person. Or you've been praying for me on my social media feeds for now, like you're my friend, you're my mentor, and actually we have no real relationship yet, and yet it feels incredibly personal, intimate, and real. So I think we have to know that people are encountering us online before we encounter them. And we have to recognize that actually people are checking us out. Are our behaviors matching what we say? Is there evidence of fruit in our lives, in our character, in how we're presenting ourselves, how we're interacting, what we say our church is like? And we have to recognize that actually people are scrutinizing us. We also need to recognize, this is the other thing I would say about online, especially for churches, that kind of check it out, is for people outside of the church is really weird. We do really weird things. We stand up and sing. Sometimes somebody says, let's share the peace, and then people start kissing each other. Like, this is odd. And we don't realize that. We don't realize our jargon. We don't recognize our habits. My husband does some mission work, and one of his favorite things is to take a whole load of church leaders into a betting shop and just go on then, place a bet. And they don't know what they're doing. They don't know the language. They don't know if they're meant to walk up to a counter. They don't know where to get a pen. And he goes, this is how people feel when they walk into your space. How do you break down some of that isolation? And if you are online, have online pastors. This is what giving is. This is why we tithe. This is what a Bible is. This is a link to the Bible. If you've got any questions about the reading, translating some of the terms that they're using, any of that stuff that you can help introduce the church and its community online will help people cross that threshold 6 months later.
It's already playing a role, and it's not like, should we consider the digital diet of every Christian and every leader? You must do, because everybody already has a diet, and we're already stuffed full of all kinds of food, whether it's good for us or whether it's junk food. A friend of mine, Michael Graham, is an author and a pastor in the States, and he does this interesting thought experiment of saying, look, even if the people in your church give you a 10 out of 10 rating for how important they think your words are, well, okay, they've given you as a preacher a 10 out of 10 rating, and you speak to them for half an hour. But they also listen to talkback radio 2 hours every day from Monday to Friday. There's 10 hours. And even if they set the authority, level down to 1 out of 10, and they listen to a YouTuber or a podcast or whatever it is, and even if they give the authority of that person a 1 out of 10, guess what? That has just outweighed your Sunday by Sunday influence by 2 to 1.
Yeah.
They've got 10 hours of content. They only give it a 1 out of 10, and they've given you a 10 out of 10, but you've only got half an hour with them.
Yeah.
So what should we do? Well, I think we should absolutely be teaching about having a healthy digital diet, and we should absolutely get onto podcasts and social media and be a part of that diet, so that Christians can imbibe not just cat videos, but things that will actually help them in their spiritual lives. It's an absolute necessity, because everybody is already imbibing this stuff. The question is, what kind of stuff are they going to imbibe?
Yeah, that's great.
That. Never thought about it like that.
Some really good stuff there. Some really challenging thoughts. Not just the fact that churches can be weird and be really daunting, but I think we've got a title for your future book, and the second of our hashtags there, haven't we?
Yep. Vicars in a betting shop.
Hashtag Vicars in a betting shop. I'm sure we'll see that trending by this time next week.
Absolutely. But the thing is, as jokey as we are with it, that it is such a reversed, but it just helps you to understand how weird it is, how weird as it would be, it is for a vicar to be in a betting shop and to be expected to know how to do a bet or whatever process things.
See, even in talking about it, we're feeling uncomfortable. Yeah,
definitely. But as awkward as that is, it must be exactly the same for someone who's not a Christian to be coming into a church and to, again, the whole Christianese stuff, but to sort of go, what's the peace? Like, what? Like, oh, we're actually having blood here? Like, even
not for for me, saying the peace, I don't really know what that means, because that's not really part of the churches that I go to. No. And so even looking for a new church as a Christian can be daunting. I mean, that's something we've said before, and also highlights the importance of what we're putting out online first. People are looking at it before they come to see us. They're checking us out. They're making sure that we are credible and sort of who we say we are, before they actually then ever cross the door.
Yeah, I like how she called it stalking. Over the threshold. But I like how she said it was stalking, because that, I mean, it'd be nice if people were that kind of intense about it. But I mean, it's true though. Yeah, you look up, before you go on a date with someone, presumably. I just was married before kind of really online dating was a thing, kind of. But of this sort of like, if I'm going on a date with someone, I'm going to see what I can find online before I commit to a serious relationship or just actually invest any time into it. I'm going to see what is out in the world. And so, it's what Joe said was so true.
Yeah. And speaking of investing time, see how I've so neatly segued that on there. That was really helpful and challenging. I think what Glenn's put out there about where your time's going in the week, and even if you are weighting what you hear on a Sunday as a lot heavier, church is only one really small part of the week, and so other stuff can really easily outweigh it, even if you know that it's trash that you're consuming. I think there's a challenge there for all of us, but especially for churches, because we need to be thinking, how do we pastor that? How do we teach that? Like, how do we get people thinking about encouraging a healthy digital diet and a healthy spiritual diet? Because this isn't a new thing. Like, TV has been around for a lot longer than the internet has, and people spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time watching TV, but we do need to think, now that digital is just so pervasive in every area of everyday life, we need to be thinking about how we can handle that and navigate that carefully as Christians.
And whether you're intentionally consuming it or not, both visually, audibly, and from a diet perspective, that's kind of a good word. But I know we've kind of spoken about it, of like our aversion to kind of horror films and stuff. It's a very intentional thing that we're not watching. But if you're watching rubbish on TV that is not aligned with a Christian faith, whether you are in like, it's just in the background, I'm not really, or, stuff that you scroll on social media and kind of like is just on your algorithm, that is a problem. And you need to adjust your diet so that stuff is not coming up anymore, or you need to turn the TV off so that you're not doing it. And so in the same way that we need to be intentional about what we're eating, our digital and spiritual diets, there needs to be the same intent behind it.
So as you hear the music coming in, you may suspect that we have somewhat clickbaited you. We're already not that far off an hour into listening to these responses and sort of giving our reaction. And so rather than subjecting you to a 2-hour episode, we've broken it up, and I'm afraid that we're going to have to leave you with the call to action to come back next week. But I'm pretty sure you will, because I think it's been really helpful so far.
I've loved listening to them for the second time, so I'm looking forward to the next lot.
So we'll see you next week for episode 32, where we hear more from our lovely guests.